Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. I'm really excited about our guest today. Her name is Laura Carno. She's the executive director of Faster Colorado, the author of a book called Government Ruins Nearly Everything. We'll probably get a couple of yes and amens from our audience today. She's also a senior fellow at Independent Women's Forum. She's a Colorado concerned citizen who has taken action and jumped into the fray to really make a difference for defending freedom and the rights that we have as American citizens. It's a real pleasure today to have you. Laura, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, we've got a news cycle that is kind of stuck on one topic, and rightfully so, right? We've had the recent tragic school shooting at Uvalde, Texas, at the elementary school, which it's not the first elementary school, but it somehow seems different for some reason. And I know we were talking off air about that. Tell us why you think this feels different at this moment of time.
Yeah, you know, one of the things parents say who aren't necessarily in support of armed school staff in our K-12 campuses, they say, it's an urban school or a suburban school. Cops are right next door. That it'll just be a matter of a minute or two. And what we've seen, and by the way, a minute or two is too long. What we saw in Uvalde, really just horrified people that, these reports of law enforcement, up to 19 of them is one of the reports, standing in the hallway outside while children were being killed, while a little girl inside was calling 911 saying, please save us. I get chills saying that. I'm a grandmother now and thinking about my little ones in a school where there's no adult that's going to save them. They're on their own. It's just really horrifying.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think from the perspective of a mom and of a grandma now, and for me as a dad of four, have already worked their way through the educational system. But what was really chilling to us, and of course we don't understand fully yet the circumstances surrounding the police response. We don't fully understand it. Man, I want to jump on it. It doesn't feel right to me, but we want to have caution because we do really love and respect and honor our police force because they are absolutely heroic. But it did feel different because you could see them outside waiting and you didn't really know what was going on inside the school. I think as that gets revealed, it's going to become maybe even more disturbing. Do you think?
Well, one would hope not. And I'm a huge supporter of law enforcement as well. And I don't think this casts dispersions on all law enforcement.
That's right.
But yeah, you're right. Was there an order given? Were there people who wanted to disobey the order? Was there information that they had that wasn't accurate that led them not to go in? I don't know, but thank God for the Border Patrol guy getting his hair cut, who grabbed that barber's shotgun and went in and stopped it.
I know. Isn't it amazing to think, just the heroism of that, right? And men and women like him are trained to run into danger. And that's what we expect always. But you mentioned it in your opening. You said, hey, 1 or 2 minutes is too long. Well, you're right. And in fact, national statistics would tell us that the average response time for police to an active school shooting event like this is 3 minutes. And that's kind of the minimum response time. And in 3 minutes, regardless of the weapon that you have, whether it's a pistol or an AR-15 or something else, you can fire off a lot of rounds. You can do a tremendous amount of damage, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. And, even if a criminal were to obey laws, and criminals don't obey laws is the punchline there, but even if a criminal were to obey laws on smaller magazine sizes, in a few minutes, you can change a whole bunch of magazines that you brought with you, showing that those sorts of laws don't do anything to keep people safe. But the thing that struck me in the beginning when very little was known other than that death count kept going up, is there should have been a well-trained armed adult there to save the children, whether it was a school resource officer, a armed security person, or those teachers who probably put themselves between bullets and children to try and save those children because their body was all they had that that's not enough. These are our children. These are our grandchildren.
That's right.
Number one goal should be keep these kids safe, return them home alive to their parents.
That's right. You know, it's interesting. So I'm a Virginia Tech alumni,
Oh, wow.
and I live in Colorado now. So I am intimately, familiar with what can happen on a campus, a college campus, a high school campus, now elementary school campuses. And the last thing that a parent wants to think is that when they drop their kids off at school, that they're really in some ways unprotected, that they're vulnerable, that they're sitting ducks, that there's no response at that school or very limited response at that school should something horrific happen. I think that's one of the things that I love about what you're doing with Faster Colorado. Let's talk a little bit about that. What's your mission? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So we're in the life-saving business. You can say that we offer these classes, which we do, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the goal is to save the lives of children and school staff members if, God forbid, one of these terrible events happens on school campus. So what we do at Faster Colorado, and we started in 2017, so we're in our sixth training year this year.
Amazing.
We offer training to these armed school staff members, and so let's note that these are not school resource officers who are members of a law enforcement agency, but this would be somebody who has a job in the school. They're a teacher, a janitor, a coach, principal. We've had a lunch lady and a school nurse, just to get
Wow.
that in folks' minds that it
Wait,
really could be
that's
any.
pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool. You know, you talk about people that want to be able to step in and
right.
protect children, and they're not necessarily who you might think they are, right?
Yeah, that's a fact. It's funny because there are some folks on the anti-gun side who oppose this policy who want you to think of this scared little 22-year-old that just got out of teaching school who's terrified of picking up a gun, or this 65-year-old woman at the end of her teaching career who's terrified of a gun. Well, guess what? I've had women both of those ages, at the beginning of her career and at the end of her
It's
career,
amazing.
who passed these courses with flying colors, and I would put my grandbabies in their class any day of the week. But you're right; they're not just the. I'm picturing my dad right now. They're not just
I'm
the
picturing
the
me. I'm picturing me
yeah,
right now. Let's go.
the old gun guy.
Yeah.
But men and women, but they're all volunteers. Nobody's forcing any of these people to carry a gun on campus. But what we do at Faster is we offer world class training. In Colorado, this law has been in place for 17 years. And before we got here 6 years ago, these schools were getting their training hours somewhere. But we felt it was important that they had access to the best training available. So, what we do is I organize the classes, but I'm not
Mm.
the instructor. All of our instructors are active duty law enforcement instructors. So they teach academies, they teach SWAT teams, they're members of SWAT teams, they're leaders on SWAT teams. The guy who teaches our the medical portion of the class is a battalion chief with a fire department here in Colorado, who's also a firearms instructor, so he can work at the line as well. These are high quality instructors, exactly the kind of people you want training these armed staff to protect children.
It's fantastic. And what I love what FASTER actually stands for, right? Faculty, Administrator, Safety, Training, and Emergency Response. I mean,
Right.
it says very clearly who you're for and what you're training for. In this training, because everyone talks about this, right? We don't want just unqualified people in the schools that now are armed, that may not know how to respond or maybe have minimum training. Are they put under stressful situations, right? It's not just standing at the range and learning how to, load and unload and make your gun safe, and, are they put in stressful situations?
Yes, very stressful situation. So this is the beauty of, number one, having law enforcement instructors who do this to cops, and number two, we actually do this training at a law enforcement training facility. So we
Amazing.
have access to not only great ranges and classrooms and high tech everything, but we actually get to use the police simulator. So we wrap up the last half day of our classes with that very realistic, the shoot no shoot scenarios. We always ask people when they're when their turn is up to take a look at their Fitbit or their Apple Watch to see what their heart rate is, because
Mm,
you're very clear on the fact that you're playing a video game, so to speak, in a
yes.
police simulator room.
Mm.
But man, your body doesn't know it, because you're making life and death decisions on how to interact with whatever the scenario is, and they go through that time and time again.
I love that, because as a gun owner, as someone who is proficient in handling guns, I have a healthy fear of weapons because you should. I remember when I used to ride motorcycles, we would always tell each other, "Hey, ride scared," and what that meant was be aware that bad things can happen. Don't get so comfortable on the bike that you get careless. And the same is true for gun ownership and handling guns, right? Don't get so comfortable and proficient that you become careless. And that's what I love about your training. Do you have updated trainings throughout the year, or is it one-time certification? What does that look like?
Yeah, so when a new school goes from zero to carrying, the staff members have to go through a level one class, and
Hmm.
it's our level one, but it's not a beginner class. They actually have to have completed some training before they get to class, because it is an advanced class even in our level one. But the level one, we have mindset, we have medical,
Hmm.
and it's a 3 day class, so a little bit longer class. Any of these folks who go through the class will tell you at the end of 3 days that it felt like a week. They are physically and emotionally exhausted.
I believe that.
But and then in subsequent years, they do a requalification. And by the way, the qualification is the post qualification, which is peace officer standards and training
Hmm.
for handgun proficiency. So
Okay.
what our instructors did is took that unit, so to speak, out of the police academy
Hmm.
on handgun proficiency. They added some of the areas of stopping an active killer that law enforcement uses. But that qualification that they have to pass, it's the same one that cops pass to get out of the academy, and that they have to requal on every year. And we actually add two additional shots to it.
Hmm.
And so we call it post plus two, and they still
Hmm.
have to qualify at 100%
Wow.
to pass. So it is a very high standard. It's a
It's
high
amazing.
standard on purpose, and not everybody passes the test, and we're okay with that.
That's amazing. Well, I love that you have a certain level of failure on it, truthfully, because you certainly don't want someone who's unprepared, or unqualified to be in there for it, right? And I think that's the big knock on this. That's the big concern from people who don't like it. I think most of the people that don't like it, this idea of arming teachers, faculty, et cetera, are people that don't understand how guns operate. They don't understand how the training works, and they don't understand that you actually can become very, very proficient at it, and the response time is on the spot. Let,
Right.
let me ask you this question: so this law has been around a long time probably because largely Columbine, right? Almost in a way, a response to the Columbine shooting, saying, "Hey, that our response time, as fast as we can be from a law enforcement perspective, we need better protection in our schools." Was that the reason that this law came about in Colorado?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I should know the answer to that. The timing makes sense, but
Mhm.
I don't know if there was any different impetus, because there
Yeah.
were a few years between.
Sure.
But I do know that the early adopters, if you picture the square that is Colorado,
Yeah.
they were the schools on those outside borders where you've got a county sheriff's office that services that county, but there might be three people on duty at any time, and they're all over this huge county.
Yeah.
We've got districts that are one building, K
Mm.
through 12, and they pull from, let's say, a 60-minute radius on
My
like
gosh.
how far the buses
Oh yeah.
take kids to get to school. So you think about that and you say, gosh, what are the chances one of those couple three deputies is going to be around? We
Yeah.
even had one school that did a test in a more rural area,
Mm.
25 minutes response time, and it was a Department of Wildlife or Fish and Game or something like that person that was closer than the sheriff's deputies. So, you there might be somebody close, but
Mm.
likely you're not, and those schools know that they're their own first responders. And what we're seeing is that everybody's their own first responder in these
Yes.
situations.
Yeah. It's amazing you say that because I didn't actually think of the rural areas. I do remember moving to Colorado from the East Coast and being just amazed. Where we lived in the Maryland area, we could literally be in 5 different states within about 2.5 hours. But
Right.
here, 2.5 hours doesn't even hardly get you out of your county sometimes.
Yeah.
So, this idea that the response time in rural areas might be far longer than it would be in a more urban or suburban setting.
Yeah, and it's really those county sheriffs in the
Mm.
beginning who said to their school districts, Here's the law. Get yourself some training." And in some cases, those sheriffs would invite the armed school staff to do training with the sheriff's office where they had availability. But yeah, law enforcement was like, "We know we're not going to be there.
Yeah.
You all need to figure out something because it'll be well over by the time we get there."
So tell us how many schools? I know we've got a lot of schools in Colorado, for example. How many school districts are engaged actively in promoting this type of product, to promoting this type of training? Are you equally acceptable in all of the different counties and school districts, or is it different?
Yeah, so there are around 178, I think, school districts. I get corrected every time I give the wrong number. I think it's 178, something like that. So out of that many school districts, Faster is training schools in 37 of those districts. So still a minority.
37 out of how many?
178-ish.
Golly day, that is so
Yeah.
concerning.
Yeah, and so to the question, are we equally accepted everywhere? The makeup of those 37 is mostly rural, and then the law in Colorado also allows for charter schools to be able to make independent security decisions. So those that aren't rural tend to be suburban charter schools who might be in a larger district that the big district hasn't gotten there yet. But there are some charter schools, and I don't think that it is a coincidence that those charter schools tend to have waiting lists in the hundreds of
Wow.
kids. We get calls all the time saying, "Where are these armed schools? Because I want my kids there." We
Yeah.
don't out our schools. There are some that have outed themselves, but parents understand that charter schools at least have an easier path because it's just that charter school board that needs to make the decision, not the whole big school board.
It's amazing. How much of this is really built around political lines? Because this is what makes the average American citizen absolutely bonkers,
Right.
right? We cannot. We're so tired of the politics of this. We're so tired of the divisiveness of this issue that when a tragedy like this happens, the typical anti-gunners come out, and it has nothing to do with providing security and safety for our kids. None of these solutions seem to do that. How much of the adaptation of your program is built around political lines, would you say?
Yeah. So here's some interesting, I'll give you some interesting thoughts on that. So rural areas tend to be more conservative. Rural people, people who work in rural schools tend to have come from rural areas, maybe grown up, even gone to that school and then stayed in the community. So there's more of an acceptance of firearms are a normal part of life. Of course, I carry a firearm. I'm
Mm.
disarmed when I go to school, unless my school has that policy. So that falls on political lines, but maybe not for political reasons.
Yeah.
Outside of rural areas, I think pro-gun people are just going to, who tend to be Republican, are just going to be more comfortable with it. And
Mm.
union-backed school board members tend to be very, very, very opposed. But here's where the breakdown comes with parents.
Mm.
Liberal parents, conservative parents, apolitical parents, 100% of them want their children returned home alive every single day.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
So in some of these incidents, they can say, well, gosh, what if this, what if that? I don't think we need to go to armed staff. They think through what the other things are that might not involve firearms.
Hmm.
But like I said, after this thing in Uvalde, the interest, and I'll just say the volume of emails and calls into me and into Faster Colorado, 5 times normal
Wow.
after a school shooting, which, that's a spike in and of itself, but, it's like a 5 times normal spike. And it's parents saying, how do I make sure armed people are there to protect my children at the point of attack, by the way.
Yes.
And that's the key.
Yes. It's amazing because I was just thinking, we all, anyone with a child in school, want that child. Like you said, we 100% agree. We want our kids to return to us safely. End of story, full stop,
Yeah.
as we hear in
Every
politics
day.
today. Every single day.
Every day is not too high a bar.
That's right. And it feels like this, it does feel different, but the only problem is it feels like we're going back to the same old with respect to political lines being drawn and, and the same solutions that have already proven not to work. This solution does work, and there's several other solutions that we can take that I think are important. One of the things that I've maintained from the very beginning is we protect the things that matter most to us, and we do whatever we need to take care of those targets. So, for example, we keep fans safe at stadiums. We keep customers safe at banks. We care about our money. We care about our games. We keep travelers safe at airports. We care about getting to our destination appropriately. For the life of me, I can't understand why we can't universally find solutions to keep our kids safe in school. I value our kids 10x more than a silly sporting event, or even my money in a bank, or traveling from one place to another, and yet we can't agree. I think this is the thing that frustrates most Americans, but what you're doing with Faster and some of these other solutions that are surfacing, we actually can take control of this process and put some pressure on folks to actually get this into the end zone, to solve this problem and protect our kids. Are you hopeful for that?
Yeah, and such great points. And I will add to that. When Nancy Pelosi gets additional death threats, she has additional men with guns that
Exactly.
protect her literally around her person. So members of Congress who oppose this,
Yes.
they know that having well trained armed defenders around you is the solution. They don't want it to be for schools. This would be very bad for their narrative.
Yes.
But they know dang well what it would take. And then that the armed flight deck
Yes.
program, where
Yeah.
1 out of 10 flights have an armed pilot or captain or co-pilot.
Amazing.
We're all okay with that, and
Yes.
somehow the narrative breaks down in schools. The other interesting point
Yeah.
to this is, back to the do something. People always say do something, and and we should say let's do something.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different ideas. People want to talk about fatherless homes. They want to talk about video games, mental health. There are all kinds of things. And I
Yes.
say to those people, please spend time looking into those. While you do, let's get well-trained armed people there to protect our children today.
Yes.
That's not it's not either or. Look at mental health or armed staff.
Yes.
All of the above, for goodness sakes. As you said, our children
Exactly.
are more important than money in the bank and sporting
Yes.
events and Nancy Pelosi. And protect these innocent babies in school, for goodness sakes. This is a completely solvable
Yes.
problem.
Yeah, and this is why I think that's why this is different, because people like you and me and a whole bunch of other moms and dads in the community are not going to accept the 2-week news cycle. Everyone complains about it. We further restrict guns, and it does nothing to protect our kids. We're not accepting that garbage narrative anymore. And what I love about this is we're in the process of saying harden these targets. I mean, right now, you think about this, virtually, if you just base it on facts, right? If we just go back to facts, I like facts. Some people like feelings. I like feelings occasionally, but in this case, I really like facts. Over 94% of public mass shootings occurred in gun-free zones. I can guarantee you there were signs up advertising that we're gun-free, which makes that a very soft target. In fact, any school that has a sign up right now that says gun-free zone, I believe these events are foreseeable. I believe that they are now responsible. and they're going to be held liable. If you keep that sign up, you're advertising for trouble, and those signs should be immediately removed from the schools, regardless of whether they're a gun-free zone or not. This is the thing that we believe we can make a difference on. You mentioned elected officials having just an unbelievable arsenal around them. Every single one of them is protected. And yet they vote consistently against this type of thing. The president said, his spokesperson said, that the issue of hardening our targets, making them more difficult and more obvious that you're going to be met with resistance, is not a priority for him. Does that frustrate you as someone who's been in this? I mean, that just makes me crazy.
Yeah, he doesn't want to solve the problem. I I was aghast when he said that. I how do you answer that? Especially after that just happened. How could he
Yes.
say that?
Yes.
When he lives in the White House, which is the most hardened target in the
Yes.
country, is the president of the United States more important than the lives of these 19 children and two teachers who died? I I don't think you can come to the same conclusion that the president did.
Yeah. You certainly can't make that argument. But I think it's funny because sometimes politicians think things, but they're smart enough not to say things. We're just saying things now. We're saying exactly what we think. So when parents out here in America hear that type of thing, that just makes us furious. One great thing from it is, of course, it energizes us. It energizes us to get engaged in a more significant way, and I think that's what we need. You know, you probably saw the visit that Matthew McConaughey went to the White House, had a night, some words behind the scene with the administration, and was communicating some things there. And then they had the press conference, of course. I got to tell you, I'm not a fan of Hollywood, generally speaking. I am a Matthew McConaughey fan. I think he's a good man. I think he's a kind of a pro-America type of dude. And he's grown up in Texas. His birth town, his hometown where he grew up was Uvalde. So he
Right.
could speak with a level of passion and conviction. It was kind of a mixed bag, wasn't it? Depending on
It
your
was.
opinion. What did you take away from that conversation?
I'm with you. I like him as an actor. I like his. He's not anti-America like most
Right.
people in Hollywood are, and so I appreciate that.
Yes.
Um, but then he pivoted to, like, almost, he didn't use these words, but almost like it's our duty as Americans
Yeah.
to curb ourselves, those of us who did not do a school shooting, who are never going
Right.
to do a school shooting.
Right.
And I struggle to understand the point that disarming law-abiding citizens who, by the way, concealed carriers, I'm sure you've heard the statistic, concealed carry holders are the most law-abiding cohort of
Yes.
American society, even more
Yes.
law-abiding than law enforcement.
Yes.
And so when we see responsible gun owners, especially those who carry a concealed firearm on a daily basis, we should just be very thankful
Yes.
that they're here, because they are they sort of stand in the breach. The
Yes.
CDC has their research says between 500 and 2 million
Yes.
defensive gun uses every year. That's
Yes.
significant.
Yes.
And but the other thing to look at when people, especially Hollywood or Democrats in Congress, bring these things up, they respond only to a school shooting like this. They don't respond when an equal number of people dies over a weekend in
Yes.
Chicago or in DC.
Yes.
All of these lives are precious, and what's happening in Chicago, as an example, doesn't fit their narrative, because Chicago has the most strict gun control in the country, and if gun
Yes.
control worked, Chicago
Yes.
would be the safest place in the country, and it's not. So
Yes.
they only focus on situations where it fits their narrative.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
thank you, Matthew McConaughey, for loving our country, but
Yes.
those solutions you proposed are not going to make anything better.
And you said it. And I think I want to underscore that statement, right? Those solutions you've proposed aren't going to do any good. I do love the fact that he asked for a return to family values. I love the fact that he said, hey, we need to return to American values. I even like the way he said it. It felt like a movie.
Yeah.
Sorry. but he said some great things. We need to focus on mental health, et cetera. You said it best. Though the areas with the highest rates of gun control, the most number of laws and restrictions, are the ones where a lot of this violence is happening. California is a great example. The number one state in the country for gun laws and restrictions on gun ownership, and the number one state for active shooter incidents in 2021. In fact, they win that prize every single year. Chicago, New York, all the big metropolitan areas that have restricted law-abiding gun ownership are under siege by criminal activity. And you said it earlier, criminals don't follow gun laws. They don't. And we know this to be true. We know it's overwhelmingly true. If you, what are 3 or 4 things? Obviously, we've got the FASTER program, which I think is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I applaud you for doing this. What are 2 or 3 other things that you might recommend with your breadth of knowledge and experience that parents and concerned parents can recommend to their school administrators? What would we do to make these targets more hard?
Yeah, and I would start by asking your school questions. And my friend Rob Morse on the Slow Facts blog did a post. I shared it on my social media about the questions that you should be asking your schools, and they are very specific questions on how your school would react if various situations happened.
Yes.
And if your school says that it's none of your business, don't worry, pats you on the head and says, we've got this covered, get your kids out of school.
Yes.
Schools need to be very clear on the fact that the parents are in charge. The parents elect the school boards, and so much discussion of curriculum. But if your kids don't come home alive every day, it doesn't matter what the curriculum was they learned or didn't learn there.
That's right.
Not to say we shouldn't look at curriculum, because there's some awful stuff out there, but we should at least have an equal focus on school safety and making sure that our kids are actually safe. There's a term called in loco parentis, in place of the parent. Schools act in loco parentis. We're not there to make sure that our kid is doing okay and is safe. The school has to act in our stead, and it is our job to demand of them how we want that to look, from curriculum to safety or whatever. So I'd encourage folks to look at that either on my social media or on Rob Morse's Slow Facts blog, and just take a look, because the questions are very, very direct.
Yeah, it's excellent. And we're going to have all the links and connection points for you and all of the organizations that you're part of in our notes here for sure. And we'll get all of our listeners engaged with you. We've created a resource as well that talk about what do parents do, because I'm active in our school board meetings. There are thousands of people that are starting to engage in those school board meetings. And now we can have an educated decision and an urgent conversation about keeping our kids safe. Is there any last words that you'd like to share with our listeners about how to reach you or what to do so that we can get the ball moving in our communities?
Sure. I'll share one quote. My friend Bob Schaefer at Liberty Common Charter School up in northern Colorado says that it is the right and responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. They are your children. You are hiring a school to take care of them. So please don't forget that. Folks can find more information about FASTER at fastercolorado.com. We've got videos, some media we've done. We have a FAQ, a Busting the Myths link, all kinds of resources there. And you can contact me there as well. And follow us on social media, Faster Colorado, or you can follow me as well, Laura Carno, on all the social media platforms.
It's fantastic. Laura, thank you so much. Thanks for investing the time. Thanks for what you're doing to keep our kids safe. And we just admire and love what you're doing. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, thank you.